In our next session, most people think of LHON as the loss of central vision, but there's really much more to it than that. And in some cases, there are symptoms beyond vision loss that impact some people who carry an LHON mutation. And you start with the fact that LHON is rare, and then you start dealing with the fact that these additional symptoms are rare within rare, and you just don't hear much about it. One of the reasons why the relationship between the LHON patient community and the UMDF is so important is because people with other Mito disorders generally do have other systemic issues, and vision loss is really the least of their worries. And at the general UMDF patient meeting tomorrow and on Saturday, the researchers, they're often talking about LHON. Patients are talking about everything but vision loss or LHON. It's two different communities. At some level, though, these two worlds collide, and in the place where these two worlds collide is really LHON plus. And at last year's LHON conference, I met a few people whose family had an LHON mutation, but everyone's fully sighted. That's not normal in the LHON community. Usually they come into this community when someone has vision loss. But they learned about having the LHON mutation while they were trying to figure out some other medical problems in their family. One of those people that I met last year is our next speaker, and she's been working to develop the LHON plus community to try and understand commonalities within that world, and I would like to introduce to you Lisa Thompson.
Hello. My story is rather different than other people. Getting this diagnosis has been extremely difficult as a woman. I was really misunderstood by many medical professionals, many of whom wanted to help but did not understand what was causing my symptoms. A number of medical professionals viewed my symptoms as psychogenic in origin, and there were some who simply shrugged their shoulders and wished me luck in getting a diagnosis for a disease that they could not identify. This went on for years, and gradually it completely wore me down, particularly when I knew in my heart that something was terribly wrong, and I was getting worse. While there was a number of doctors who believed me, I simply did not have enough answers, and I needed to find a definitive diagnosis to explain all my issues. My turning point came after I suffered my second metabolic stroke, following a tooth extraction under local anesthetic. After being misdiagnosed once again in the ER, I was informed that I couldn't have suffered a stroke because my medical imaging was normal. I was simply discharged to my own devices and advised to see my family physician. I must say that my family physician has been phenomenally supportive through all my issues. In search of an answer, I saw a neurologist, neurotologist, neuro-ophthalmologist, and physiatrist, all who agreed that it made no sense that I could have a second stroke in essentially the same location of my brain, and yet I did. One of my doctors said that episodes presented like regular strokes with no evidence on imaging, and rhetorically asked, what other stroke mimics are there? I turned to Dr. Google and entered all of my symptoms: endocrine, strokes, headaches, and out popped MELAS, mitochondrial encephalomyopathy, lactic acidosis, and stroke-like episodes, a mitochondrial disease. I showed this to my neurologist and my physiatrist and said, "You're going to hate me. I went on the internet, and I think I might have a mitochondrial disorder." I was really fortunate that they listened and said that I just might be right. At that time, the focus was really on healing and rehabilitation, and that's what we did. I was bedridden for 5 months and literally only able to walk with a walker from my bed to the bathroom, and even that was all the stamina or ability I had. I couldn't make it down the stairs on my own. I required assistance up and down the stairs. I used a walker or a wheelchair to get into the car and be driven to appointments. My symptoms consisted of severe pain, nausea, vertigo, fatigue, visual changes, such as double vision, and believe it or not, seeing colors on screen devices in 3D that was like using 3D glasses at the movies. As a mom, it was scary to see that suddenly I had gone from an extremely functional person, running a business, raising 2 young children, being a wife, and able to do anything that I chose to do. And then suddenly I was faced with relearning many of my daily skills all over again. After the 5 months in bed at home, it was finally accepted that I required more care, and eventually I was admitted for 2 months of acute rehabilitation in the hospital. That is where I learned how to walk again. I spent long, exhausting days working with physical therapists, occupational therapists, absolutely determined to regain what I had lost. I then returned home, and over the following year, received additional therapies on our home and was admitted at one point back into a rehabilitation program where I was able to learn more things and progress and regain my independence. It has been a tremendously long haul, and through all of that period, I still didn't have a diagnosis. I searched the internet, trying to figure out what I might have, and tried to find organizations that might be able to help me. The thing that kept sticking in my head is, what if I have MELAS? I had to figure this out because I was still being treated on anticoagulants, as if the strokes had been vascular strokes. If I did have MELAS, which is something quite different from vascular events, it should be treated in an entirely different way. I've since learned from many LHON plus families that my path to finding a diagnosis was very similar to theirs. And as a group, if it weren't for our persistence in getting to the bottom of what was making us sicker, we would still likely be undiagnosed. Many turned to the internet to aid in putting together what was going on in conjunction with their doctors. I finally discovered UMDF and contacted them. I was grateful that they were able to provide me with the information enabling me to find a doctor in my region who diagnosed and treated mitochondrial disorders. I was referred to the Adult Metabolic Clinic in Vancouver. When I saw them, they agreed that I did likely have MELAS. Several weeks after providing a sample for genetic testing, I received a phone call and was advised to return to the clinic. I knew something was up because they immediately had me begin a vitamin protocol, and they moved up my appointment. It was very clear to me that they had found something in the genetic testing. They had performed mitochondrial DNA whole genome sequencing. I arrived for my appointment and was told, "We think you have LHON." They informed me it was potentially very serious, and they added, "But we think you have the plus form." I stated that I didn't have blindness, and no one in my maternal family had a history of blindness. They said that I was the only person in the world that they had been able to determine that had these exact 2 mutations in combination. They had contacted other research facilities to confirm my diagnosis of LHON+. So it seems that my LHON+ had presented in a way that is similar to classic MELAS. I've since learned that LHON+ seems to be a bit of a masquerader and can look like several different mitochondrial diseases and can also look like MS. I also found that there are few researchers in the world studying this disease. When I searched the OrphanNet database for obscure diseases, LHON+ doesn't even come up on their search engine. When you search other well-known rare disease database sites, LHON+ doesn't come up either. That's when I realized that something more needed to be done with regards to this disease if I was going to have a future, knowing that I helped lay a bit of a foundation for generations to follow. Last year I attended a UMDF symposium and met some amazing people, some of whom are here today. Of course, I'm sure most of you know Lissa Points-Knott. I also had a very brief but important conversation for myself with Dr. Corelli and Dr. Wallace last year, and in the course of an afternoon, I realized that there was something more that I could be doing to help support further research into this disease. I also met another woman by the name of Shelley, and what was amazing was when we chatted, she had also been diagnosed with LHON+. We realized that we carried one of the same genes and had some very similar overlaps in our stories and our symptoms and our presentations. In our discussions, we finally came up with the idea that wouldn't it be amazing if we could somehow start an LH1+ group that could support patients trying to go through this process of figuring out whether they had this disease. This group could help afflicted individuals to find doctors who could help to diagnose them and find the resources for the genetic diagnosis and subsequent management. It is also our hope and intention to collect a global cohort of LH1+ individuals to assist researchers in future studies. I have learned a lot from reading existing research papers, and I value tremendously what has been accomplished to date. We want to assist in any way that we can to expand the existing knowledge base. In forming this group, we took the approach that we would form a group and try to support one another, but hopefully with the greater good in mind. We would create a cohort of individuals with this disease that would make it much easier for researchers around the world to find an LH1 plus population to study. Because LH1 plus is so rare, we felt it might be quite difficult for many researchers to ever be able to collect a statistically significant sized group of individuals for study. So we created a Facebook page. And within the first day, I was amazed from initially believing that I may be the only person in the world with my form of LH1 plus, to finding by the second day that I had 30 people on the group who had joined, and it has grown from there. It's been inspiring to see other things that people had learned about their disease and some of the things that LH1 plus patients were experiencing that were very similar to what I had experienced and others were encountering. I have tried to provide as much scientific knowledge from UMDF and other sources that I can gather for the group so that we can develop a strong background knowledge that is based on safe, trustworthy scientific sources. We have learned and stumbled across some really interesting things along the way. I have heard some incredible stories from many families who have written me privately and others who have shared their experiences more publicly on the Facebook page. There are young children, mothers, husbands, grandmothers, and grandfathers who are all afflicted. What is interesting to see is that this is really a multi-generational disease, and the way some people are describing it seems to me, at the very least, as a non-medical professional, LH1 plus is something that can look very much like MS, other mitochondrial diseases. Sometimes it's a bit like Lee's disease or Milas, and it certainly can have characteristics that look very different than the classic LHON. There are many people in the group who have the disease who are not visually impaired, and there are probably just as many who have the disease who are visually impaired to some extent. What makes this interesting is I think it changes what the clinical presentation may be. For example, with my history, I presented with profound vertigo following a splenectomy surgery. This led me to multiple doctors, including neurologists, neurotologists, neuro-ophthalmologists, and finally a verdict for me after years of investigation. I had suffered a brainstem stroke during or following the surgery. My surgery was needed after a thyroid cancer diagnosis, radioiodine treatment, a blood disorder that flared as a result of the radioiodine, subsequent gallbladder surgery, and the splenectomy. Clearly, I had multi-organ involvement. This led me to experiencing further deterioration and more systemic involvement before I eventually got my answer, probably because I didn't present with the usual signs and symptoms of a vascular stroke. For myself, I was dealing with it from an unusual, vague medical presentation. For other LH1 patients, the predominant factor is blindness, and they begin with neurological or systemic symptoms, which hopefully leads them to a knowledgeable neuro-ophthalmologist or neurologist. For the visually impaired patients, what may be happening is they receive the diagnosis of LHON, but the additional symptoms that they are experiencing may be overlooked and not tested further genetically. Now that there is easier access to more extensive genetic testing beyond LHON than there was even just a few years ago, it could be possible to identify additional point mutations in addition to LHON. So what may be happening is these people go down a long road of suffering with these other symptoms that they describe over and over again to multiple doctors, and they are ignored. Most of them end up on long-term disability, physically unable to work. Hopefully, with further genetic testing and screening, there can be a eureka moment, and it is diagnosed with LHON plus, with effective treatment eventually sometime in the future following further research. There does not seem to be a common initial presentation that all patients with LH1 plus experience in the beginning. As the disease evolves, then it seems that LH1 plus patients seem to have more signs and symptoms in common. A few patients in the group have presented as I did with metabolic strokes and may have more than one mutation. Some patients present with visual abnormalities, and others may present with MS-like symptoms, with perhaps even some brain lesions that can be seen on MRI that might confuse the real diagnosis of LH1+ even more. The clinical presentation of LH1+ can be quite variable. I feel that anyone who presents with vision loss, with multiple other symptoms, or multi-symptom issues, deserves further investigation to rule out LH1+. I think that is where we as an LH1+ community are caught in a dilemma trying to get a proper diagnosis in this disease. I think that had every family in our group listened to and accepted what they had been told by their clinicians along the way, they would not have likely arrived at their correct diagnosis. And every family who has eventually obtained a correct diagnosis has likely had to fight long and hard to get there. They likely achieved a correct diagnosis through sheer perseverance and determination, primarily because they knew that they were getting sicker and sicker and they weren't prepared to give up pursuing the matter until they achieved a satisfactory answer. With that in mind, I am curious if this disease is underdiagnosed, then what may really exist in the population. A really important take-home message for medical personnel is to understand that these patients are truly sick and the basis of their complaints is not psychogenic. They are extremely frustrated, especially as they are experiencing red flags for mitochondrial disease, such as when a child or adult has more than 3 organ systems with problems, or when typical disease exhibits atypical qualities, and just trying to figure out what is going on. Some have family histories of LHON, but that is not always the rule. Many are women. We, as an LH1+ community, need to support researchers in the development of diagnostic criteria and standard treatment protocols for this disease. Currently, there does not seem to be a clear consensus as to how these patients should be treated and followed, especially when some patients are seeing neuro-ophthalmologists and not finding their way to mitochondrial specialists and vice versa. It is important that LH1+ does not get overlooked for studies because currently LH1+ does not even appear on clinicaltrials.gov website as a medical condition. Our group of LH1+ patients is eager and very willing to contribute to science, and we would love to be a part of making that happen. Thank you.
Hi, folks. I'm back. Phil Yeski here once again. And Lisa, thank you so much for sharing those perspectives with everybody. That's so important that you hear it directly from the affected individuals of what it's like to live with the disease and the issues you face. And at the end, you brought up a critical element of our strategy, and that's the importance of sharing information and contributing as best we can as a community towards finding treatments and cures. I didn't have a chance this morning. I'll just quickly do this. I know, Lisa, I'm stealing time from your agenda, but we are soft launching here at the conference a mitochondrial disease community registry. And I know this is a very organized group and that you kind of have your own lists, but I would really encourage you to join this registry as well. The idea being that you would also be part of a larger population, right, of mitochondrial diseases, and that we can begin to gather data to understand commonalities, but also differences, right, between different types of mitochondrial disease. So you'll be hearing a lot more about that. If you're going to stick around for the family meeting tomorrow, right? Yes, Friday, tomorrow morning, I will be talking about the registry in more detail in the morning. But otherwise, I would say stay tuned or check our website. We'll be marketing and communicating this registry much more aggressively in the coming month or so when we really ramp up. It's going to be a critical asset for the development of treatments and cures that we effectively collect health information from those affected by mitochondrial disease so that we can really begin to put together natural history studies and have that data accessible for the drug developers. So that's my little pitch for the registry, so please do keep it in mind. And it's completely compatible with what you were saying, Lisa, that's how we can help. That's the big thing.